Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 6, Episode 12, presented by Marketile. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
We're both back home from Shop Talk in Vegas. To listeners, be sure and check out our Snack Size Recap bonus episode now available. And for this episode, our very special guest is Tracey Brown, President and Chief Customer Officer, Walgreens.
Yeah, it's great to, for me anyway, to reconnect with Tracey. She used to live in Dallas, and we used to see each other way back when, but have not talked to her in a while. And it's a great conversation and a really interesting story about what Walgreens, I guess we should call it the Walgreens Boots Alliance is their, full name, what they are up to.
Let's get right into the news. So the NRF comes out with their sales forecast. So they had put some numbers down and did a bit of a session actually while we were in Vegas. What do you make of their numbers? They say, what is it, growth between 4 and 6% in 2023?
Yeah, well, we're always trying to read the tea leaves here. And of course, it's nice to lean on an organization that spends a lot of time looking at these things. And it's interesting. 4 to 6% growth is projected. If you think about where inflation is looking like it's headed to, that looks pretty much in line with the range of inflation. So that's just pretty flat transaction value. They also said that they expect growth in essentially e-commerce to be up 10 to 12%, which is a bit closer to the longer term trend. What I thought was interesting was they also talked about how this number compares to numbers in the past. So last year was about 7% annual growth. And historically, pre-pandemic, the average annual sales growth rate was 3.6%. So if you think about the inflationary impact the last couple of years, again, it's not really real growth in a way, in a manner of looking at it. So I think that's kind of interesting. The other thing they talked about as part of the overall release, which we could probably put a link to in the show notes, is they are anticipating that job growth is going to start to decelerate because of just generally slower economic activity, restrictive credit conditions, a bunch of things we've talked about before. And they're predicting that the unemployment rate in the U.S., which is at an all-time low, is likely to exceed 4% before the end of the year. So there's a little bit of a quick macro picture there.
It's interesting because on the upside, so to speak, fueling growth is, what did they say, like $1 trillion of estimated savings still from I guess an overhang from the COVID era. So, there is still some growth left in the engine, but flat, I think, is the new up, if I would summarize what I saw from the NRF forecast. And listen, there's a lot of companies who historically have a lot of jobs to fill and can't get everything done. I talk to retailers all the time, said our projects are moving slower than we like because we can't find the people. So maybe this clearing of the market, as you economists might say, could be helpful. Let's talk about Canadian-based Lululemon. They put out some earnings, told some stories, and what did you think of what they had to say?
Well, as I was prepping for this, I started to make a list of several of the companies that reported earnings in the past week. And I thought rather than just go through and give general commentary about them, we're talking about Lululemon in particular, because their performance continues to be really impressive. 30% year-over-year sales growth. Now, some of that is comp. Some of that is they continue to open stores and lean into digital and things like that. But it's just really impressive. And I think there's two lessons there. One is this is very clearly a remarkable retailer. I mean, the things they do in terms of amplifying the wow and their execution from a omnichannel or harmonized basis is excellent. The other thing that they did in their earnings announcement, or as part of the earnings announcement, was talk about a pretty significant write-down in their investment in Mirror, the Mirror acquisition they made, I guess, 18 months ago.
Would they pay like $400 or $500 million for that all in? Because they were already before they bought it, they had a stake in it, so it wasn't they had a toe in the water before they bought it,
But it was a pretty significant deal, and it's very clear that it has not worked out to the degree that they hoped. But to me, it's both an underscoring of the willingness to experiment, but also the willingness to say, hey, this is not really working the way we want it to, and they're not moving on completely from it, but to move on. So I think they're just a company to really lift up. as a very strong, optimistic story, but also I think a retailer that other retailers can really learn from by digging into their story.
Some executive changes at the department store. Macy's Jeff Jeanette is set to retire. A good run. What is it, like 30 years in the business? And they've announced a new leader already. So what do you think of the prospects for growth or the prospects for the new CEO?
Well, Jeff's yes, as you said, he's a lifer pretty much there at Macy's. He's been at the helm for a number of years. Really, kind of a mixed legacy there, as we've talked about multiple times on the podcast. Macy's is to be applauded in a lot of respects for trying lots of new things. Unfortunately, most of them have not really worked particularly well. I mean, Jeff's in his 60s, so it's not. I don't think this is a
shock to anybody.
Yeah. Anyway. Right. So, and the guy that's replacing him, Tony Springs, currently runs Bloomingdale's. So it'll be interesting to see with a more upscale, high service level background, I guess you could say, from Bloomingdale's, what that might mean for Macy's. Tony's not taking over until February of next year, so this is not an imminent change. But some changes at a company that, frankly, I think needs to inject some different perspective.
Let's talk about Alibaba. So we haven't spoken about Alibaba in a long time, actually, probably since 11/11. But they're splitting into 6 groups and trying to unlock some value. What do you make of all that?
Well, this is I think it's pretty interesting. Alibaba, as I'm sure most people will know, one of the biggest retailers in the world, kind of the Amazon of China, though that's probably not the most fair comparison. But yeah, they've gotten into a number of different things. So they have their core and by far biggest e-commerce business. They also have cloud computing, as much like Amazon does with AWS, and a bunch of other divisions. And, the same argument could be made for Amazon is you've got an extremely valuable cloud service business trapped inside a bigger conglomerate of widely different profit and ROI outcomes. And so they are trying to unlock some value by spinning these things out into separate pieces. So I think it's pretty interesting. Investors liked the news. I was listening actually to Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway on the Pivot podcast talk about how this is actually a move that maybe CEOs don't like because they like having all these different divisions and kind of the cyclicality and the inability for outsiders to really understand exactly what is going on.
Opacity and cyclicality. We're big words. Big words.
Exactly. Ooh, this is like I'm ready for my SATs now. But I think you can potentially unlock a lot of value for investors by separating out the pieces. And so we'll see how that all goes. But it looks like initially investors really like it. We'll see when they actually float these different IPOs, how they all turn out. But I do wonder whether this is a little bit of a blueprint for where Amazon is headed, which I think might be the next thing we talk about.
Well, I was just going to say, from the Amazon of China to Amazon, they've announced a few more layoffs, and they've also, started putting out other kind of news items. What did you read in the paper about Amazon?
Well, this happened actually, I guess, a couple of weeks ago that Amazon announced their second round of layoffs this year, which I think is their third round of layoffs in about 6 months. So they clearly continue to be very focused on improving profitability. In this particular case, trying to lower costs. The other thing, as we've talked about returns and the need to have returns reduction, we've got an episode coming up on that in about a month. But they're going to start warning online customers about products that are frequently returned. I think this is a pretty interesting strategy. There's lots of different ways to try to attack the returns problem.
Do you mean return? They're going to warn customers who return often, or that this item is often returned?
The latter. Yeah, okay, highlighting products, sort of saying, I think in essence, either you may not want to buy this because you might not be happy.
The item?
Well, that's one of the things that's occurred to me. But I think in the case of apparel anyway, not true of other items, it may be a bit of a warning that, the fit of this might be not what you're expecting. And so perhaps be a little bit more careful. But it's an interesting, it sounds very much like an experiment. Yeah. But it's the first time we've seen this kind of thing about be careful what you wish for.
It's like de-influencing. They've become a de-influencer.
I learned that term on our last episode, and now we're seeing. So it's just I think because of the heightened awareness that the returns issue is getting. I think we're going to see a number of experiments, and this is just a new one from a company that is obviously has a lot of influence, but also clearly is trying to work on some of the things that are contributing to their less than stellar profitability in retail.
Well, speaking of less than stellar, Bed Bath & Beyond basically threatening, if you don't buy my shares, I'm going to close the business, as I'm kind of reading it. It's like, hey, we came up with these financial shenanigans, and if you don't buy it, you're going to miss us. Am I reading that right?
Well, it's desperate people do desperate things, I guess. Yeah, it continues. I mean, it's sometimes I lean into the Schadenfreude here. There's another, if you're studying for SATs, kids, that's another word to go learn. Yeah, they, without getting into the weeds too much on this, they've avoided bankruptcy through a pretty creative financing plan in the hopes of raising about $1 billion. That is not going according to plan. So now they're pretty much saying we're going to float a new equity offering. I think they're trying to raise about $300 million. And yeah, they were very explicit about essentially, if this doesn't work, we're going to file for bankruptcy.
We're out of ideas. Yeah, we're out of ideas.
We're out of ideas, yeah. And by the way, on that news, the stock, which was already, I think we talked about a week or two ago, how the stock had gone below $1. Their overall market cap now is under $100 million, which is pretty crazy when you think about how big a company they were and how valuable a company they were just a few years ago. As part of this announcement, they also said that they are, and they're reporting, I think, in a few weeks, their actual official quarterly earnings, but they said preliminarily we're going to be reporting quarterly sales that'll be down 40 to 50%. And that is on a year ago basis, which was already not a great number. So the business is kind of in free fall. So I think that this is perhaps going to come to a head here pretty quickly with a bankruptcy filing, but we'll see. It is a bit of a Hail Mary.
Well, from a massively struggling retailer to a massively successful manufacturer, wholesaler, and retailer, let's talk about Nike. They're talking about brand-focused stores, and they're doing all kinds of neat things. Share with the people what your impressions are.
Well, we keep coming back to Nike, I think, as like Lululemon, a very remarkable retailer. They've struggled. Struggle is probably too strong a word, but they've hit a few rough patches, particularly because of how reliant they are on China. And China's obviously been a difficult market to be particularly successful in for the last 3 years. And they've also, though actually as a great comparison to Lululemon, struggled with high levels of inventory. Lululemon's made some good progress on that without having to take a lot of markdowns. Nike's had to take some to get repositioned for the future. But the particular thing that was in the news this week is the opening of their Michael Jordan branded stores as part of their accelerated direct-to-consumer strategy. So not only are they opening these Jordan-focused stores, they've got a bunch of other concepts, Nike Rise, Nike Live, House of Innovation, that they are opening in addition to really dialing up their e-commerce perspective. So Nike to me is a great example of a company that is getting a good balance or moving to a better balance perhaps of wholesale and direct-to-consumer while also developing a portfolio of go-to-market strategies as opposed to kind of a one-size-fits-all concept, which I think has caused, it's one of the things that's causing struggles for the department stores. They basically kind of kept the little bit of everything for everybody kind of go-to-market strategy as opposed to a bit more segmented or it's not, I wouldn't say micro-targeted because they're not tiny, but more specific offerings for different types of customers with a different customer experience and different product and service offering.
Well, all right. Well, that's a good wrap on the news. And now, just before we get to our very special guest, Tracey Brown, President and Chief Customer Officer for Walgreens, let's hear from our presenting sponsor. There are two types of retailers: those that are committed to transforming at the speed of disruption, and those that aren't. If you're a retailer that implements significant changes by intuition, you may soon join the Hall of Shame of executives who bet the farm on initiatives that ultimately failed, so maybe consider brushing up your resume. But if you're a retailer hungry for a better way to gain useful insights on the impacts of your store layout, design, and strategic initiatives, you need to know MarketDial. MarketDial is an easy-to-use testing platform that emboldens great decisions, leading to reliable, scalable results. With MarketDial, you can be confident in the outcome of your in-store pilot initiatives before rolling them out across your fleet. Validate your remarkable ideas with MarketDial's in-store testing solution. The proof is in the testing. Learn more at marketdial.com. That's marketdial.com.
Well, I'm very excited to welcome Tracey Brown to the podcast. It has been we were trying to figure this out, 14 years since we've spoken directly or seen each other in person. So why not reunite in public on the Remarkable Retail Podcast? But welcome, Tracey. How are you today?
Steve, I'm so excited to be here. And yes, it's been quite a while. But, I stay following you, Steve, and stay connected. So I'm excited to be here and be back connected.
Well, it sounds like we've been spying on each other over the years, so we'll try not to make that too creepy. But what we love to do just to get things rolling is ask our guests just maybe give us a little bit about their personal and career journey, because aside from the things you were doing years ago when I spent some time with you here in Dallas, a few things have evolved in that time. So tell us a little bit more about who Tracey Brown is.
I like to start from the inside and then go out, Steve. Listen, I am someone who is probably a little bit type A, but I have both a left brain and right brain thing going. I'm an engineer, a chemical engineer, but also have a creative streak and a creative side. I ran an advertising agency called Rap in Dallas. Did that for a bit. I also have a creative outlet. I'm a drummer. I've been drumming since elementary school. I started, if you go on any of the social media platforms, you'll probably see my daughter and I kind of rocking out. I have a beautiful 19-year-old daughter now who just started her freshman year at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Super proud of her. Super psyched for her. She's into performing arts, so she's a dancer. And then I have my wonderful husband. My husband and I have been together for 37 years. He is definitely the yin to my yang, but that kind of forms my kind of close family unit. And quite frankly, I think that all of the goodness that I've been able to establish and enjoy over the last several years has become from the grounding that I have with my family. I then step out a little bit and talk about, work. And from a work perspective, I've done a bunch. As I mentioned, I started as a chemical engineer right on the lab benches of Procter & Gamble. Through that journey, ended up discovering that I had a love for brand management, product management. So I went back and got my MBA. And from that, having that kind of combination between chemical engineer, MBA, allowed me to experience a lot of different industries, from oil and gas to financial services to high tech to, I've done startups and very large companies. Now, along that journey, Steve, I fell in love with retail and had a lot of retail clients when I was at Wrap. And then actually went client side and worked for Walmart. Moved my family to Bentonville, Arkansas. That was great, great time. And while at Walmart, really started to step out and really become a very deep advocate for people living with diabetes. I have been living with type 2 diabetes for 19 years now. And really began to develop a deep passion and feeling like this was a part of my purpose to really bend towards trying to improve the health and well-being of people. It started with diabetes because I live with diabetes. And that's what catapulted me into the health and wellness space. I actually ended up leaving Walmart to go work and be the CEO of the American Diabetes Association. And my burning desire around transforming healthcare only got stronger. And when I really started to understand the complexity of the healthcare ecosystem, I became even more convinced that the place that you could develop and really transform the health and wellness of people in this country really had to be leveraging a retail footprint that was already in community. And that is what actually led me to my current job here at Walgreens.
Well, that's it's so nice to see people's passions and interests really line up with their career. By the way, since you've got the drumming background, if during the podcast I'm rushing or dragging, you'll let me know, I'm sure. But that's our only inside drumming reference we will ever make. Maybe we'll edit that out in the final cut. But in any event,
I don't know. But on that same theme, I have a question I'm going to jump in with, Tracey. Buddy Rich, Neil Peart, or Tommy Lee?
Buddy Rich.
Buddy Rich. All right, there you have it.
All right. I'm going to put a good word in for John Bonham. But anyway, let's get back on task here. So I imagine lots of people listening know about Walgreens or Boots, the Walgreens Boots Alliance. Can you explain a little bit more, though, about the company, how it's come together, just to kind of give everybody, kind of get them level set on what we're going to talk about as we go a bit deeper?
Yeah. So, Walgreens, Steve, has a very rich history. We were founded back in 1901, so over 120 years old. And we were founded by a pharmacist, Charles Walgreen. And his desire and his passion, all the way back to 1901 was really around helping improve the health and wellness of people. Through Charles's desire to reach as many people as possible, he actually was quite innovative in terms of developing a front end, as we call it, front end part of the retail store where you could go get your prescriptions and do a little shopping in the front of the store. He was also innovative in the early days. Charles Walgreens did things like creating malts. We had a food counter and restaurants. All of these things, in my reflection, were really just traffic drivers and things to bring people into the pharmacy, again, to help improve the overall health and well-being. Now, over the course of the years, Walgreens has seen a lot of things. As I mentioned, involved in many things, restaurants, product development, food innovation, these kinds of things. But around 1975, Cork Walgreen, who was the last Walgreen to actually run the company, really got narrowly focused and really methodically focused on being the best and most convenient drugstore. And that was the thing that Cork established that we would be best in world at. And so he built his whole value proposition. The whole point of differentiation was about convenience, about providing a great frictionless experience in store, and being that trusted health and wellness pharmacy provider. Sure. From about 2000 or so, you've seen us kind of do some iterations where we merged with Boots and created WBA, up until where we are today, Steve, with our current CEO, who is awesome, Rosalind Brewer. She is actually kind of taking us back to our roots, where we are now pivoting to be the most convenient and trusted health and wellness destination across the entire health continuum, Steve. So from preventative wellness to acute to chronic disease state management to post-acute. That's who Walgreens is today. That's the pivot, the hard pivot that we're making, because our purpose is really to bring more joyful lives through better health to every American here in this country.
Well, that's fantastic. It really resonates with me. When I lived, we talked off mic that I used to live not too far from the Northbrook, Illinois campus of Walgreens. And during the time I was in Chicago, I think there were about 3 Walgreens that opened ever closer to where we lived at that time. And my ex-wife and I my now ex-wife and I would joke that it's just a matter of time before you guys build a Walgreens in our backyard, because it was becoming so so convenient. But in any event, so tell us about your specific role. Now, I know part of your title is Chief Customer Officer. There's lots of titles that seem to be thrown around and created. And what exactly is it that you do, and what's your focus?
Yeah, so I have, to your point about lots of titles, like Executive Vice President and President of Walgreens Retail and U.S. Chief Customer Officer. What does all of that really mean? Simply put, if you think about health and well-being, Steve, it's very personal, right? If you think about the importance of where health is in this country, and I think COVID-19 made us ever more aware of the importance of our health, but it starts at a very personal level, which means that you have to really understand the customer, the patient, the consumer, whichever word that you want to use, at their core. And you have to figure out, how are you actually going to establish an emotional connection? And how are you going to establish trust? Because if you really want to change health and well-being for a person, there first has to be trust, and then has to be an emotional connection, because managing your health and well-being is really about behavior change, Steve.
Right.
So
yeah.
Chief Customer Officer was really at the heart of when Roz thinks about pivoting to healthcare, is that we have to be steeped in data, insights, knowledge around who the customer, the patient is that walks through our doors, that are in communities all around the country, so that we can figure out how to connect with them and how to create value. It's about value creation. And so the job was framed first so that across the entire company, whether you're talking about pharmacy, merchandising, supply chain, R&D, Walgreens Health, the front part of our store, the customer resonates across all of those pieces, because as you know, the customer doesn't view us as teams or departments. It's one customer and one Walgreens. So I really have all of the forward-facing parts of our business that touch the customer, or actually, merchandising, supply chain as an example, where the product has to land up in store to touch the customer. The idea was to bring all of that under one umbrella to make sure that we're busting down silos and we are seen as one Walgreens to the customer.
So I want to bring Michael in, but maybe just one quick question kind of related to this. From all your experience, not just your experience at Walgreens, but, there's been so much discussion over the years of the need to be customer-centric. Like, that doesn't seem to be a pretty controversial point of view to take, but it doesn't seem like many companies have actually brought that to life, including an organizational structure like the one you describe. Any thoughts on that, and why it's a challenge for companies to do that?
I think it's hard. So I think a couple of things, Steve. Way back, like I've been in this customer-centric place since the early 90s, where I worked with Don Peppers and Martha Rogers, well before one-to-one marketing was popular and customer-centricity was popular. We were on the cutting edge there. I think it started initially very hard for people because they didn't have data, right? But then with the proliferation of the internet and tools and technology and databases and AI and all these things, now people have data. But I think structurally, the way companies are set up is typically by departments. And so you have a silo effect happening where what you do in one department may actually not be great in terms of providing an experience or the customer, say, in store. And so you have this kind of tension around meeting department or divisional needs and not actually thinking holistically about the customer. And if you just think about normal businesses, you are incentivized usually by your department or hitting your team goals.
Right.
I think organizations that are seeing, look, what customer centricity really means, like that has to be at the top. And so how do you structurally make that happen? How do you make sure that the data and insights actually flow? And then how do you incentivize the kind of, as I say, pulling the thread through the sweater across all of these silos so that you're incentivized to always stay focused on the customer and do what's right for the customer? It's hard.
You know, as I'm reflecting on what you're saying, Tracey, I want to talk about culture in the organization. You know, to say the least, retail, the pharmacy business has gone through tremendous challenges or constraints of supply chain. I didn't have, baby formula shortage on my bingo card. How is an organization, through the pandemic and now, how does the organization kind of facilitate that culture of, I don't know, what would you describe it as, agility, and have you become a more agile business? You talked about hard pivots behind the current purpose. How do you get the organization all moving in the same direction?
I actually think, Michael, for us, COVID actually, as horrible as COVID has been, was in terms of the humanity of it all, it forced organizations, and particularly an organization like Walgreens, where we actually, our whole everything came focused on keeping Americans healthy and alive through COVID, that you quickly, all those silos in that kind of crisis quickly break down. And you quickly figure out how to focus on that one thing that matters. And believe it or not, a company of our size, $130 billion company with hundreds of thousands of employees, when you're myopically focused on we've got to get shots in arms, we've got to get people healthy, you start to do things that you never thought that you could do. You start to move at a pace. I mean, the level of bureaucracy that exists in most large companies is the same level of bureaucracy that existed here. However, COVID taught us that you can break that stuff down fast when you have to. And that's what happened. And I think, Michael, we have continued to take kind of that COVID experience and the muscle and the courage that we had to do things differently and break things that maybe had been kind of institutionalized around here for the betterment of the customer. We kept on to that. So we were able to pivot, again, things like the baby formula shortage, things like the cough, cold, ped. There was a shortage because of how we learned how to move with speed and stay agile. We bought ahead. We knew that this cough, cold, peds thing was going to become a thing. We bought ahead quickly. So it taught us something, Michael, right? It taught us that we can move fast, even as a large organization. It taught us how to be a team and break down silos. And it taught us how to myopically focus on what matters. And that actually helped us with our customer centricity as well.
It's so interesting because I've talked to many CEOs who are worried that kind of agility, that kind of fast decision making, that kind of breaking through bureaucracy has kind of been lost, fortunately, with the end largely of the COVID era. But without that galvanizing mission, their task, and it sounds like yours as well, is to keep the organization focused on similar cultural attributes, right? Without the overarching risk of a global pandemic. So that's super interesting. I want to dive into maybe a tactical element of the business. I was doing some store tours in New York City, and we're finding, I'm looking at a lot of product. I want to talk about loss prevention for a few minutes. Lots of product being locked up, lots of security staff. We seem to see and not just OTC products, but even, detergents kind of locked up. It seems like that's on the rise. And I wonder if you have any thoughts around the cause of that and what you as an organization are trying to do to adjust to the current situation. And if you just think it's a temporary blip, or do you think there's something else going on with your stores?
Yeah, Michael, this is one of those pain points. I'm going to try and not get on my soapbox on this one, but I think you're absolutely, the environment has changed, full stop. And you have to ask yourself, why has the environment and the dynamics changed? Because there is shrink or theft everywhere. Mm-hmm. This is kind of on the rise. And I've been trying to think about what has actually happened. Has something happened to like just the physical environment? Has something happened to the cultural environment? Has something happened, right? So here's what we do know. I do think the rise of the internet and the ability to buy and sell and, how easy it is to do that now online, I actually do think that has contributed.
Certainly an enabler, right? The marketplaces are big enablers. And there's some work going through Congress to try to get at that problem, right?
And we're on the front lines there as well. I think this is something that is going to require everyone's help to get around. So that the organized crime rings, like we are on the front lines working with the government, federal, state, local officials to try and actually even working with fellow retailers, because it's not just a Walgreens problem. No. It's everybody's problem. Yeah. Working together there. Then you actually look at, I started thinking about particularly post-COVID, what COVID did. There were so many people who lost their jobs, Michael, that you think about where people are in terms of, Maslow hierarchy of needs and just being able to live and survive. And you ask yourself, has that added to all of this? You think about populations. I've been reading more and more about the number of people who have found themselves homeless with no place to live. I mean, there's just a number of dynamics here. And the law has changed, over the course of several years. You may know this, the laws have gotten lenient in terms of actually locking up people for theft, like stealing, things from stores. Like you don't get locked up anymore. Yeah. Now,
and sometimes the police
answer, I don't know, but now we have all of these things that are kind of unlocked and open.
Yeah. It is really the triangulation of, more ORC, human trafficking, the platforms, and this long-term implications of changes of police and the justice system. Anyway, we probably have a whole separate podcast.
That's right. We could do that.
I'm passionate about this subject, but let me pass the mic over back to Steve and bring us home.
Tracey, I'm curious, particularly because of the diverse career that you've had. How, just thinking big picture, how has that informed your leadership style and some of your leadership principles? Are there particular things you might call out that you think, whether folks work in this similar industry or at the kind of level you do that really has made a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I knew at an early age, Steve, was leadership matters, right? I studied as a young person before I even got into a career and out of college. I studied some of the most successful businesses to really understand if there were any commonalities to the businesses that seem to be long-term sustainably growing over long periods of time. Even as the world changed and the environment changed, these organizations still seem to figure out how to get it right and keep going. And one of the commonalities that I pegged to was great leadership. And so I've always believed that leadership mattered. And there have been a few tools that I have collected across my career that have added to that. And I'll share just a few of them, Steve. And these aren't things that people will be like, oh my gosh, that's profound. But these are the things that matter, because what it is about is helping people unlock the potential within themselves and helping people become the best version of themselves. And when you do that, your business, Steve, benefits and thrives. So one of the things that I learned early on is you got to get points on the board. Say less, do more. Even as a leader, right? Are you having an impact? The other thing that is clear on my list is that people at the end of the day want to be a part of something, Steve, and they want to be inspired. So are you clear as a leader on what your vision is? Where are you going? What are you doing? And does it have purpose? Because I think, too, today, more so than ever, people care more and more around the purpose of an organization and what you value, what matters. Do you say what you do? And so the third thing I would say is how you show up. How you show up as a leader every single day. The things that you say, the things that you do add up to who you are as a leader. Mm-hmm. I've amassed those 3 tools in my toolbox over time. And these are the things that matter most now more than ever right now, Steve, because it's about galvanizing and mobilizing people to do something bigger than they could do on their own by themselves. And that's why I am here at Walgreens to drive this transformation of our health and wellness, because there are too many millions of people suffering and dying in the greatest country in the world because of poor health.
Right.
Leadership matters.
I love that. I think sometimes, my own experience has been that simple is better. Like those are very straightforward kind of principles. It's just we don't see it being lived out in the world as much as we all need. So it's a great place to leave it. Thanks so much for joining us. Congratulations on your personal success, your team success, and everything that's going on Walgreens. And hope to see you in a shorter interval than 13 or 14 years.
Let's make it happen. Thank you so much for having me, Steve. Enjoyed it.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, your favorite podcast platform, and be sure to drop us that 5-star review. New episodes of Season 6, presented by Marketile, will show up each and every Tuesday. Be sure to tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us.
And I'm Steve Dennis, author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn, and you can catch up with Steve and me at the World Retail Congress, April 25th in Barcelona. Until then, safe travels, everyone.